The Fifth Avenue Palace, the lost Vanderbilt mansions of New York. On Fifth Avenue, where New York's skyline cuts into the clouds and the city never truly sleeps, there was once a world that looked nothing like the Manhattan we know today. Before the glass towers, before the boutiques and corporate lobbies, this avenue was lined with private palaces, stone facades as tall as small cathedrals, iron gates that hid courtyards from the street, ballrooms, galleries, libraries, entire European fantasies built block by block in the heart of America's loudest city. And in the center of that kingdom stood one name, Vanderbilt. For a few extraordinary decades, the Vanderbilts ruled Fifth Avenue with architecture. They didn't just live here, they announced themselves here, in marble, limestone, and carved detail, as if the city itself were a stage built for their dynasty. But New York is a machine that never stops turning. Land becomes more valuable than legacy. Buildings become opportunities. And even the grandest mansion can be erased with a single demolition order. Tonight, we step into the vanished world of the Fifth Avenue palaces and uncover how America's richest family tried to turn money into permanence, why the city eventually rejected the very mansions that once defined it, and what we lose when greatness is replaced by efficiency. The stage of New York. Where wealth became visible by the late 19th century, New York had become the capital of American ambition. The city was swelling with immigrants, industry, finance, and noise. It was a place where fortunes could be made faster than tradition could approve of them. And in that moment, Fifth Avenue became something rare, a corridor where wealth could be seen. To walk the avenue was to read a social map. The street told you who mattered, who was rising, and who had already conquered. Because here, architecture wasn't just shelter, it was language. A facade could signal lineage, a gate could signal exclusion, a mansion could announce that your family was not merely rich, but entitled to a certain kind of respect. At the top of that social world were the families who had learned to convert industry into influence. Railroads, shipping, steel, banking. Men who controlled movement, materials, and money, and who understood that control must be displayed to feel real. This was the era of private trains, private yachts, and private clubs. But the most powerful symbol was the house. Not a country house far away, but a palace in the city where everyone could see it. Fifth Avenue became the American answer to European boulevards, a place where stone and style could imitate centuries of aristocracy in a single generation. And imitation wasn't shameful here. It was strategy, because the richest Americans did not want to look new. They wanted to look inevitable. They wanted to borrow the authority of old Europe and then enlarge it with American scale. In this world, money alone wasn't enough. You, where you dined, what you wore, and most importantly, where you lived. Society was a kind of invisible government, with rules enforced by invitations. A name could open doors, but the wrong name or the wrong behavior could close them forever. That pressure created a strange kind of competition. If one family built a grand staircase, another needed a grander one. If one house imported a ceiling, another imported an entire room. If one hostess staged a dinner, another staged an event that felt like history itself had arrived in a carriage. And as Fifth Avenue filled with palaces, it began to look like a private empire, a row of fortresses designed not to defend against enemies, but to defend against insignificance. This is where the Vanderbilts enter the story, not as guests, but as architects of the entire performance. Fifth Avenue was also perfectly positioned between worlds. To the east, the city's business districts and newspapers. To the west, Central Park, the great green escape where the elite could be seen taking carriage rides, strolling, and performing leisure as carefully as they performed dinner. And because the avenue was so public, it created a special kind of anxiety. A country estate could hide luxury behind trees. Fifth Avenue forced luxury to stand in the sunlight. That visibility changed how homes were designed. Entrances became statements. Windows became calculated, revealing light and movement without revealing vulnerability. Even the height of a doorway mattered because it controlled the way a guest felt in their own body the moment they arrived. In these years, the city's elite also lived by a social technology that seems almost impossible today. Calling cards, afternoon visits, introductions brokered by the right names. A woman's reception day, the day you were at home to be visited, could determine how widely you were accepted. So the avenue became an ecosystem. One palace invited another into competition. One facade forced another to look dated. And once you stepped into that competition, there was no graceful way to stop. The Vanderbilt machine, fortune, pressure, and display. To understand why the Vanderbilts transformed Fifth Avenue, you have to understand what they represented. In America, there were wealthy families, and then there were the Vanderbilts. Their fortune began with movement, shipping, then railroads, and it expanded until the name itself became a shorthand for power. But a fortune built in industry carries an insecurity that old titles do not. It can rise quickly, and it can be questioned quickly. So the Vanderbilts did what the greatest dynasties have always done. They built monuments. Not monuments in a park. Monuments you could live inside. Monuments that hosted dinners, controlled views, and forced visitors to speak more softly, simply because the ceilings were too high to ignore. In the social universe of New York, money was not a private fact. It was a public force. And the city watched the Vanderbilts the way modern audiences watch celebrities, with fascination, with envy, and with constant judgment. Newspapers described their parties. Rumors followed their marriages. Their houses became landmarks long before the city officially recognized them. And within the family, wealth created its own internal competition. Each new generation inherited not only money, but expectation. You didn't just keep the fortune, you proved it. So Fifth Avenue became a kind of scoreboard, a line of addresses that told the world who was winning. Some Vanderbilt houses leaned into Renaissance grandeur, heavy stone, classical symmetry, the feeling of a European palace transplanted into Manhattan. Others leaned into French fantasies, chateau-like rooftops, carved ornament, dramatic entrances that turned a city sidewalk into a stage. And beneath the style, there was always the same message: we are permanent. But permanence was an illusion in a city that treated land like a living market. New York was not built to preserve private kingdoms. It was built to grow. So the Vanderbilt mansions were both triumph and gamble, a bet that stone could outlast the city's appetite. And for a time, the bet looked successful. In the golden years, Fifth Avenue's Vanderbilt palaces formed a corridor of privilege so dense that people began to speak of it as a world of its own, a place where the city's chaos was held back by gates, staff, and etiquette. But to understand that world, we have to step inside, because the true power of these mansions wasn't only what they looked like from the street, it was what they did to the people who entered them. At one point, so many Vanderbilt residences clustered along the avenue that observers began to treat the stretch like a private neighborhood inside the city, a row of related houses linked by reputation and rivalry. A dynasty doesn't need a crown when it has a street, and the Vanderbilts understood what architecture could do that money alone could not. A fortune can be spent and forgotten. A building can anchor a name in the public imagination. So the houses multiplied into a kind of narrative, each new palace answering the last, each renovation a response to social pressure, each interior upgrade a silent attempt to stay ahead of the city's gaze. This was not only about comfort, it was about myth-making, because the ultimate goal was not simply to be rich, it was to be remembered as inevitable. But myth-making comes with a cost. The larger the statement, the more it requires maintenance, staff, and constant reinvestment. And in a city like New York, reinvestment is never optional because the city itself never stops escalating the standards. Inside the lost palaces, marble ritual, and the hidden system. Imagine arriving at a Fifth Avenue Vanderbilt mansion on a winter evening. Outside, the city is loud. Carriages and early automobiles, street vendors, the constant motion of Manhattan. Inside, the door closes and the noise disappears. That transition is the first luxury, because the mansion does not simply offer comfort, soft, it offers control. You enter a vestibule designed to slow you down, then a hall designed to lift your gaze, then a staircase designed to choreograph your arrival before you speak. Elite architecture does not merely impress, it directs. The public rooms were built like theater sets, a reception hall for first impressions, a drawing room for conversation, a dining room for ritual, a ballroom for spectacle. Everything was planned around performance. Walls did not simply hold paintings, they framed identity. Chandeliers did not simply light a room, they produced an atmosphere in which wealth felt inevitable. And the materials mattered because they carried meaning. Marble whispered Rome, gilt whispered Versailles, carved wood and heavy tapestries whispered inheritance. But the most astonishing detail is this. Many of these palaces were modern machines disguised as ancient grandeur. Behind carved panels were wires for electric light. Behind grand fireplaces were heating systems designed to warm rooms the size of small public buildings. Behind elegant bathrooms were plumbing systems that made private comfort possible on an industrial scale. Luxury is often described as effortless, but in a mansion like this, effortless is engineered, and the engineering extended to movement. The houses were designed with two circulations, one for guests and one for staff. Guests drifted through grand corridors and gallery-like halls. Staff moved through service passages, staircases, and back doors meant to keep labor invisible. You were not meant to see the machinery that kept the performance running. This is where the mansion becomes a small society, a hierarchy built into architecture. Upstairs, the family lived in rooms that balanced comfort with display. There were private libraries, bedrooms, sitting rooms, spaces where the house softened its voice. But even privacy carried an awareness of status, because in these homes, even the quiet rooms were arranged to remind you who you were. Downstairs, another world ran on schedules: laundry, cooking, polishing, heating, deliveries. The labor was constant because the standard was relentless. Think about the daily preparation behind a single dinner. Menus planned in advance. Ingredients arriving from markets and suppliers across the city. Silver polished until it reflected like water. Glassware placed with mathematical precision. Flowers arranged not only for beauty, but for symbolism. Then the choreography. The moment doors open, the moment plates arrive, the moment conversation shifts between courses. A dinner in a Vanderbilt mansion was not a meal, it was a demonstration. And the demonstration extended beyond food, it extended to the city itself. Because to host on Fifth Avenue was to claim Manhattan as your backdrop. Carriages arriving at the entrance turned the street into a procession. Guests stepping out in formal attire turned the sidewalk into a runway. The mansion was a fortress of refinement in the middle of urban energy, a place designed to make the outside world feel ordinary by comparison. But even in its golden years, these palaces carried a hidden vulnerability. They were built on land whose value was rising faster than tradition could hold it in place. And the more the city grew, the more it began to treat these private kingdoms as obstacles. To understand why, we have to look at the social engine that fueled the mansions, the culture that demanded ever greater display. In a true Fifth Avenue palace, even the smallest gestures were engineered. A coat is taken in a vestibule so the guest feels immediately cared for. A mirror is placed where lamplight flatters. A corridor is widened where crowds might gather after a performance. Some rooms were designed for a single function, making people feel they belong to your world. A library signaled intellect and restraint. A music room signaled culture. A gallery signaled that art, and therefore history, was within your reach. And the ballroom signaled the ultimate claim, that you could host the city's defining night. But there is another layer to these palaces that rarely survives in photographs: sound. In the public rooms, the sound is softened. Thick carpets absorb footsteps. Heavy drapery dulls echoes. Conversation becomes intimate even when the ceiling is high, because the room is designed to make every voice feel controlled. In the service world, the sound is practical. Clinking china, boiling water, laundry moving, the quick rhythm of shoes on back stairs. And then in the middle, the house hides the transitions. A door that closes silently, a panel that disguises a passage, a dumbwaiter that carries trays upwards so a meal seems to appear by magic. Luxury is often simply the elimination of visible effort. Technology helped create that magic. Electric bells, speaking tubes, early telephones, systems designed to turn a request into an immediate response. A guest might never see a kitchen, but the kitchen would feel present in the timing of service. A family might never walk through a service corridor, but the service corridor would decide whether the evening felt flawless. And consider the staff required to make a palace function as if it were effortless. Cooks and scullery workers, maids and valets, footmen trained in silence, doormen who controlled the boundary between public and private. Each role shaped not only comfort, but image. Because in these houses, image was the true product. The house produced a feeling that wealth was natural, that refinement was inherited, that power was unquestionable, and that feeling was not accidental. It was practiced, night after night, until the performance became routine. Yet the more routine it became, the more fragile it was. Delivery, one broken system, one shortage of staff could crack the illusion. That is why these palaces demanded constant attention. Not because the owners were paranoid, but because the environment itself was so elaborate that it could never truly relax. A palace is not a home first, it is a responsibility first. Society as power, balls, rules, and architecture as authority. In Gilded Age New York, society was not entertainment, it was governance. Who you were seen with could shape your future. Where you were invited could define your legitimacy. And for families like the Vanderbilts, powerful, wealthy, and sometimes resented. Social acceptance mattered almost as much as money. This is why the mansions were not built for family life alone. They were built for ritual. The city's elite calendar was filled with dinners, receptions, charity events, and balls, each one a test of status disguised as leisure. A successful season could cement a family's position. A failed season could turn a name into gossip. So the houses were designed to host at scale. Ballrooms large enough to hold crowds, galleries long enough to stage processions, staircases wide enough to turn a single entrance into a public moment. And the competition was subtle but merciless. If a rival family hosted a dinner with rare music and imported flowers, you hosted something grander. If someone installed a new chandelier, you rebuilt an entire room. This wasn't vanity alone, it was strategy. Because in a society where wealth had no official title, architecture became a form of authority. A palace on Fifth Avenue said, "We are not temporary, we are part of the city's story." But society's rules were always shifting. New money arrived. Old families guarded doors. The same glamour that elevated a dynasty could also trap it inside an endless need to perform. And performance is expensive, not only in money, but in time, attention, and pressure. Over time, even the richest families began to feel the weight of the machine. Staffing requirements were enormous. Maintenance never stopped. Repairs were constant, and the city itself was changing faster than any mansion could, because Manhattan was becoming vertical. Elevators, steel frames, and new construction methods made it possible to build higher and to squeeze more profit from every square foot of land. A private palace took up space. A tower could multiply that space into income. So as the 20th century advanced, Fifth Avenue's palaces began to face a quiet new enemy: economics. Taxes rose, operating costs rose, public attitudes toward extreme private grandeur began to change. And suddenly, what once looked like permanence began to look like vulnerability. A mansion is not only built, it is maintained. And when the numbers stop making sense, the most beautiful stone can become negotiable. This is how a dynasty can lose a palace. Not in a war, not in a scandal, but in a city that keeps calculating. And when the calculations win, demolition becomes the final ceremony. Society also had geography. The opera, the theater, the hotels, the clubs, all of it created a network of appearances. A Vanderbilt palace was not only a destination, it was a hub in an entire circuit of being seen. And being seen required preparation. Wardrobes were planned like campaigns. Jewelry was chosen with intention. Even timing was calculated. Arriving too early looked eager. Arriving too late looked careless. Inside the mansions, the rituals continued. After dinner, guests might move to another room for music or conversation. The way a film moves from scene to scene, the house guided the flow so that the evening never stalled. That guidance is part of the architecture. Doors aligned for reveals, rooms sequenced for rhythm, staircases placed for entrances. And beneath every entrance was labor. The staff reset rooms between phases, refreshed fires, adjusted light, cleared glasses, and made sure the air itself felt composed. That is why these homes feel almost unreal in memory, because they were engineered to eliminate friction. But the 20th century brought friction back. New labor expectations, new laws, new social attitudes that questioned why a few people lived inside palaces while the city outside struggled and strained. And as the city's population and economy grew, Fifth Avenue's palaces began to look less like symbols of leadership and more like symbols of distance. A private fortress can feel admirable in a boom. In a crisis, it can feel provocative. Demolition is destiny when land outweighed legacy. The fall of the Fifth Avenue palaces did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened the way cities change, quietly then suddenly. One house is sold, another is subdivided, another is judged too costly to maintain, and then the wrecking crews arrive, and an entire world becomes rubble. There is something uniquely haunting about demolition in Manhattan, because it doesn't feel like decay. It feels like replacement. A palace disappears, and within months, a new structure rises. Efficient, profitable, modern. The city treats the loss like progress. But progress has a cost that is not measured in rent. When a mansion disappears, you lose more than a building. You lose craftsmanship that cannot be recreated cheaply. You lose rooms designed with artistic intention, not square foot calculations. You lose the physical evidence of an era's imagination and its contradictions. And the contradictions matter because the palaces were not pure beauty. They were also inequality made visible. They were monuments built by wealth that depended on labor, inside the house and outside it, in the industries that funded the stone. To remember the mansions honestly is to remember both truths at once. once, the brilliance of the craftsmanship and the imbalance of the society that produced it. That is why these lost houses still fascinate. They are not only nostalgia, they are questions. Why did America's richest families need to imitate European aristocracy? Why did the city celebrate their palaces and then erase them? And what does it say about modern life that we can replace a ballroom with an office floor and call it improvement? Preservation is always a negotiation with time, but in New York, time moves faster, and preservation must compete with the most powerful force in the city, the price of land. So the Vanderbilt palaces became symbols of something larger than one family. They became symbols of an American cycle. Build an empire, display it, and then watch the city consume it. Yet even if the buildings are gone, the story is not. It survives in photographs, in floor plans, in memoirs, in the ghostly memory of an avenue that once looked like a private kingdom. And it survives in the way Fifth Avenue still sells luxury today. Not through stone palaces, but through brand, glass, and image. The medium changed. The message did not. Because the desire behind the palaces is still familiar. The desire to be seen as permanent in a world that keeps moving. There is another reason the palaces disappeared. The city began to value flexibility over tradition. A mansion is fixed. Its rooms are built for a certain kind of life. A life with staff, formal dinners, and social seasons. But the modern city demanded different spaces, offices, retail floors, apartments designed for smaller households, buildings that could adapt to new tenants and new economics. So the palaces were often treated not as masterpieces, but as inefficient footprints. Their grand staircases became wasted space. Their ballrooms became underused volume. Their courtyards became missed revenue. And once you describe beauty in the language of profit, the ending becomes predictable. Yet the loss was not only architectural, it was psychological. Because when a city demolishes its palaces, it also demolishes its memory of what it once aspired to, for better and for worse. The mansions carried both elegance and inequality. They carried both craftsmanship and excess. To erase them is to simplify the past into something easier. But history is not easy. Legacy, the avenue that forgot. Today, if you walk along Fifth Avenue, you can stand where a Vanderbilt palace once stood and see almost nothing of it. A plaque, a photograph in a book, a name in an archive. The city has overwritten the stone with glass and steel, and yet the ghost of the avenue remains, in the width of the sidewalks, in the rhythm of the blocks, in the way the street still feels like a runway for power. The Fifth Avenue palaces remind us that even the grandest private worlds are temporary in a city built on change. They also remind us of what humans can create when money meets imagination, and what can vanish when imagination is no longer profitable. This is Grand House Archives. Subscribe for the next video, and join us as we continue exploring the greatest houses ever built. And if you listen carefully to the story beneath the stone, you can hear a deeper pattern. In every era, the wealthy try to turn their moment into something timeless. They build bigger, host grander, collect rarer objects, and surround themselves with beauty that feels like proof. But cities are not museums. Cities are living organisms, always hungry, always reorganizing, always trading memory for motion. That is the paradox of Fifth Avenue. It produced some of the most astonishing private architecture America ever saw, and then it erased it more completely than almost any other place could. So when we talk about the lost Vanderbilt mansions, we are not only talking about a family, we are talking about New York itself, a city that can build a palace, admire it, and then replace it without hesitation. A city that teaches the same lesson again and again. Nothing is permanent here, not even permanence built in stone. And there is one more truth in this story. The palaces disappeared, but the instinct behind them did not. Today, power still builds environments that feel separate from the city around them. Sometimes it's a private penthouse above the clouds. Sometimes it's a gated tower with its own lobby, its own security, its own invisible service system. The shapes changed, but the architecture of separation remains. So when we imagine Fifth Avenue's vanished mansions, we are also looking at the blueprint of modern luxury. The desire to live above consequences, to make comfort feel effortless, and to convert money into a kind of destiny. The difference is that the old palaces wore their ambition openly. They stood on the street like declarations. Modern power often prefers glass, reflective, private, hard to read. But the question is the same. What do we build when we want to be remembered? And what do we erase when remembering becomes inconvenient?